All right, this is the meeting of the Kubernetes Special Interest Group. Today is June 7, 2018. As a reminder, this meeting is public and recorded and published on YouTube. So the agenda today looks pretty light. We're going to do a status review of all the items that this SIG has been working on for this quarter. And then if there are any PRs or design reviews that you have that you'd like the SIG to take a look at, please put them in the agenda doc. And if there's anything else that you want to discuss, feel free to add it to the agenda and we'll go over it. So code freeze was this week for the 1.11 release. It ended up being pushed back by a week, which gave us a little more time to get things in. So what we're going to do is go over the task list and get status updates and see what the end of release status for these items are and what made it in and what did not. So the first thing on the status list is make volume dynamic provisioning topology aware. Michelle, can you give an update on this?
Yeah, so we got the scheduler part in. The part that's missing is a volume plugin that actually takes advantage of the scheduler changes. So I think we'll be concentrating on the volume plugins in 1.12. There were also a few design items that we need to also continue working on for 1.12 as well.
Okay. And what about the Kubernetes to CSI topology implementation? Cheng, do you want to give a status update on this?
I can update for Cheng. The design proposal is currently out in review right now.
And then we'll implement this next quarter.
Yep.
So basically the Kubernetes side of things got in, the CSI side of things got in, and this is the connective tissue between the two, and it was designed. So we can call this design and mark it as finished. And then next quarter, we'll actually go ahead and implement it. CSI topology support was merged and it's part of the 0.3 release. So feel free to take a look at that. Again, the tissue that connects Kubernetes to CSI has not yet been updated to take advantage of the topology logic, but the logic is in the spec now. So first step. GCE PD topology integration. I don't believe we got to this either. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Both of them are currently in progress right now, but we'll be targeting 1.12 to add the functionality in.
Okay. So let's say we didn't get to that. And the same thing is true for the AWS one?
Correct.
Local volume dynamic provisioning. I don't believe we made any progress on this either.
Yeah, this can actually, I think most of this can be done out of tree. So Lai Chu Quinn is actually working on it now, but it's not. It doesn't need to be tied to a Kubernetes release.
Okay, so we can keep track of this for the remainder of the quarter, and then at the end of the quarter, we can give it a status. Add support for online volume resizing. Hemant, I believe this got merged.
Yeah, this got merged. It's an alpha.
Awesome.
Try move next quarter beta or something.
Okay. And then volume expansion moving to beta was also completed?
Yeah.
Awesome. Adding support for volume expansion in CSI, I think the this got started, but the PR didn't get merged yet.
Yeah.
We're going to focus on this next quarter.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Moving snapshot support entry. Let's talk about that. Xing, are you on the line?
Yeah. So
actually, I missed the previous one. If you want to talk about that first.
Yeah, I think Jean is online. Talk about this one.
Sure.
Restore. So we present the restore flow on the SIG face-to-face meeting, but now we still kind of revise the design, and we are thinking to extend it to a more general application.
Jing, we're having trouble hearing you. Could you speak up a little bit?
Also, whoever's typing, I'd recommend muting.
So can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes. So I mean, we represent the restore workflow on the SIG face-to-face meeting, but we still trying to revise it to extend it to a more generic API like volume, including different kinds of volume operation. And I'm working on the design, and we'll send out a design proposal out so people can review it. If needed, I can also present to SIG storage meeting in more detail next time.
Sounds good. I'll go ahead and change this to design for this quarter. And then we'll say implementation next quarter. Basically, this quarter, what we're doing is seeking approval. And that is currently still ongoing. And hopefully in the next couple weeks, we have a thumbs up from SIG Architecture to do this work and move it in tree. And
so this in tree, we present to SIG Architecture already. And I don't think they have major concerns. So we'll just go ahead we can review it in more detail.
Okay, sounds good. And the Snapshot CSI design was merged and is part of the 0.3 release. Xing, is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, so right now, echo, sorry. Basically, I also have a design spec in the community design proposal repo. There are a few questions that Jing and I would like to discuss with the group, maybe after the project status tracking. And I also have a patch out for the snapshot API in-tree and also the in-tree controller part. Would like people to review them. I do have one question about the PR itself, because I separated them into two PRs, one dependent on the other. The first one is the API and also all the generated files. And the second one is mainly the controller, the in-tree controller. So someone suggested me to just close one PR, just use one PR instead. So I just want to know what is the best practice there.
This is adding it to in-tree or out of tree?
This is for in-tree. For in-tree, because there are a lot of code. So right now I have two PRs separate, basically one dependent on the other. However, the second PR also you can also see the commits from the first PR, right? So someone was suggesting.
Are you just doing this preemptively before we get SIG architecture approval, just to make sure that we have progress? Or?
Right. So the code is it's basically it's a patch, the PR there.
So I talked to SIG this morning, Basically, they can just review the PR there. We don't need to like present again to SIG architecture.
Sorry, I'm a little bit confused here. So my understanding was last week, Snapshots was presented to SIG architecture to get either a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether we can move entry or not. No decision was made at that meeting. So the current status is that we would present to SIG architecture. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do so this week. So the plan is to try and do so at the next meeting, which will be next week.
No, but I talked about it today. There are still people there, so I'm saying there's no major concern. So we decided to go ahead and anyone who interested, they can review it.
Okay, so today's meeting was not canceled then.
It's not it's canceled, but there are still people there. And
who was there? Were any of the
him also there?
Well, hold on, Jing. I was there, and specifically there wasn't a quorum of any of the senior folks, and they agreed that they shouldn't discuss anything important, and then later canceled the meeting after discussing some other issues.
Okay, so let's assume that we're gonna just make sure that we have all crossed our T's and dotted our I's, and let's go back to SIG architecture next week and make sure we've got 100% approval. And it sounds like preemptively, Xing, you're getting these PRs ready to go.
Yes.
Okay.
So I do want some basically this, because right now I have this 2 PRs. I want to know what is the best practice if you have a lot of code changes.
I think in general, it depends. The reason folks like to have the API changes along with the logic implementing it is because you could get the API changes in and then never implement the logic, and we'd end up shipping without the logic, which would put us in a bad state. So what some people will ask for is multiple commits, where you have a set of commits for the API and then a set of commits implementing the logic.
It's the opposite. I have 2 PRs. One is for APIs. The second one is the controller change. So, but someone asked me to close one, just have just one PR. That's I just want to make sure what is the best practice before I make that change.
I don't think there is a hard requirement across the Kubernetes project, but if someone's asking for it, I'd say
just, okay, it will be easier for me if that's the decision. I just don't want to do it again. I mean, I want to show that's right.
Yeah, no, that's fine. As long as you keep multiple commits so that it's easy to look at the API independent of the business logic. And for the API, do 2 commits, 1 for the manual changes you made and 2 for the generated code.
Yeah, that's the case right now. So
okay.
Okay.
Cool. And then what we'll do is go back to SIG architecture next week and make sure that we have absolute certainty here. It sounds like a little bit unclear today.
Sure.
All right. Thank you both for the update there. Next up is dynamic max volume per count. Hemant, so the status on this, as I understand it, is that it was merged for all the entry volume plugins, but not for CSI.
Right. Yeah. For CSI, we are going to attempt. We have the CSI spec merged, but we need the Kubernetes CSI change done in 1.12.
Sounds good. So I'm really happy that we got this in. I think this is something we've been waiting on for a long time. So thank you for that.
Cool.
PV health monitoring. Does anybody have an update on this? My understanding is
no.
Make any further progress here. Okay.
I think we didn't have time to look at this at all for 111.
Okay. So we'll punt that to 112. Block volume support to beta. My understanding here is that there was no additional work done. And then we'll be getting a new owner for it next quarter. Anything else you want to add to that, Brad?
Nope, that's accurate.
Okay. CSI block volume support, Vlad was able to get this in. The current state is very much alpha. I'm convinced that there are probably some major bugs in here because we don't actually have any volume plugins that are implementing block to test it with. Vlad is very actively looking through this code and writing some mock drivers to help test it. So there's probably going to be some bug fixes that'll come out around this. But the feature itself is alpha gated and opt-in. If you do opt in to test it out, do know it's very much alpha right now.
Is Vlad on the line?
Yes.
Yeah. So the local volumes has a few E2E tests for the block feature.
Okay.
So if you want to run those to test or potentially extend those tests to be,
That's
I
awesome.
don't know, to test
That's
something,
awesome.
you can try those
Okay.
out.
Now, the local does the local implement CSI? Because that's what we need.
Oh, no, it doesn't implement CSI.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about testing the actual Kubernetes block part itself.
No, just it's the CSI CSI drivers. That's what we need. That's the next step basically, is to have CSI drivers that implement block and make sure that all this works actually work as intended. But I will look also at the end-to-end. Maybe there's something in there I can use for testing as well.
Or maybe we could use those E2E tests and convert them for CSI host path, because host path and the local, I mean, there should be pretty much close, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's some stuff we can leverage in there.
Okay. So then we have an item called prepare CSI for GA in Q3. At this point, I don't think we're going to go GA in Q3, most likely Q4. But the work that the CSI Kubernetes implementation group has been working on, fortunately, we've hit the big items that we wanted to hit. Sergey and Vlad and the others in that group have been working very hard to get those features in. Specifically, other than block, there was two other features we wanted to get in. One was having dynamic registration of a CSI driver with the Cubelet. And the one reason for that was just alignment with other volume plugins across Kubernetes or other types of plugins like GPU and device plugins. But also because it's a requirement for another security feature we wanted to do, which was pull the logic for modifying the node object, which currently sits in a sidecar container called the driver registrar, into the Cubelet. And luckily, we've been able to do all of those features. So we're looking good in terms of the commitments that we had for this quarter. These features, including block support, as well as the plugin registration and the labeling within Cubelet, are all alpha opt-in features, and they'll be promoted in subsequent quarters to beta and to GA. And then next quarter, we're going to focus on more fit and finish stuff for CSI and start preparing for a GA, hopefully in Q4. Another aspect of CSI is figuring out how to begin to migrate the in-tree volume plugins to CSI. We want to do this because it'll make, instead of having to maintain two code bases for these volume plugins, we'll have one. And the Kubernetes project in general has a very big push to move cloud provider specific code out of the core, and this will help enable that. David has been very actively working on a design. David, do you want to give an update here? I think David may not be on the line. I can give an update on his behalf. So he has a design that is out, and he's been thinking very extensively about things like upgrade and downgrade, where things get very tricky. If you are interested in that, reach out to David. I'm not sure if it's in the community repo yet, but we'll make sure that it's there as well. I know he started in a Google Doc.
It's in the community repo already, the design.
Perfect. So take a look at that. Please comment on it. The plan here is to start implementing that, at least the baby steps for it this coming quarter. Next up is replacing volume reconstruction with the checkpointing logic because the volume reconstruction code is some of our buggiest code that remains in Cubelet. We didn't get to this, so we're going to hopefully pick it up next quarter. Moving the GCE cloud provider disk API to auto-generated code. This is something that Chang's been working on this quarter. Previously, all the wrapper APIs around the GCP cloud provider were handwritten, and Bowie, who's the networking TL, basically created a tool that'll auto-generate all of the wrapper code, and the work here was for the GCE PD volume plugin code to be modified to use that new auto-generated code. And we were able to get that done this quarter as well. Thanks to Chang for that. Next up is Cubelet device plugin registration. Sergey was working on this, and he was able to complete it in time, so we're looking good there. It is an alpha feature. Plan to break up the external storage repo. So Brad had a meeting or a session during the face-to-face meeting where we established where all the different components that currently live inside the external storage repo are going to end up. Brad, is there anything you want to add to that?
No update on that.
Okay, so I'm going to consider this done. I think we've established the design of what we want this to look like. Containerized kubelet issues end-to-end. So this is the fact that Cubelet is sometimes run in a containerized mode, and there are lots of issues that arise with when you run in that mode. We haven't in the past had very much testing around this, and have had lots of regressions around it. So the ask here was to identify an owner for this area, help add more tests, and fix bugs that do arise. I think the ask was Brad was going to find an owner for it. Brad, do you have an update here?
Yeah, no, I don't. I have the owner, but I haven't emailed him yet, so that's my bad.
So we'll leave that pending. It's not related to the code freeze, so we can address that before the end of the quarter.
I know Jan's also chasing this down. So we have like an owner in Red Hat, and then Jan's doing some work around this, and he has made some progress on it too.
Okay. Cool. Next up is host path volume reconstruction support. Ben, do you have an update on this?
Yeah, so I thought I had reproduced this 2 weeks ago, and I talked to Michelle. It turns out I reproduced a different bug that we didn't know about related to iSCSI volume reconstruction. So I've put that one on the back burner. I have now actually reproduced this bug, and I can see it happen in the debugger. And funny story, running Cubelet in a debugger is kind of hard to do, but I managed to do it.
Nice.
But I don't have a fix for this one yet. I was working on my other bug. So after today, I expect to be able to put 100% of my attention on this, unless there's any more issues with my other bug.
Okay, cool. And the nice thing is that bug fixes can go in after code freeze, so we're good there. All right, thanks, Ben. And improve service account token volumes. I reviewed Mike's PR here. It went in, got merged, and it broke a bunch of GKE tests, and we fixed those. So now it is in a happy state and merged, so that's considered done. Delete iSCSI devices on unmount. Ben, any updates on this one?
So as we talked about at the last meeting, there was an issue with races between attach and detach in the iSCSI and in the iSCSI code paths, and we agreed we wanted actual locking to avoid those races. So I've added that. It passes the tests. It's passed my tests. There's a few more tests I could do, but I'm pretty happy with this now. So as far as I'm concerned, it's ready to merge.
Okay. Has somebody actively been reviewing it?
A few people have, yeah.
So is Jan on the line by any chance? Okay, either Jan or I will take a look at this. Okay, and next up is provide an environment variable expansion in subpath mount. I saw that PR go in. Are either Kev or Michelle able to give an update on this?
Yeah, it's in and it's documented and the tests are passing.
Yay. So for those of you who don't know what this feature is, the idea here is that we have this subpath mount feature where you can say that I want a subpath of a given volume exposed inside the container instead of the root. And this is expanding on that to expose a particular path as in a dynamic location. Things like using the pod ID. Is that correct, Michelle?
Yeah, like the pod name, anything in a downward API.
So you could theoretically have a volume where you can share it between multiple pods, and then you could have subdirectories that automatically get pod-specific paths inside that volume. So pretty cool feature. Glad we were able to get it in. Next up is storage object in use feature to GA. I saw the PRs merge for this. Does anybody want to give an update? All right, I'm going to go ahead and mark that as done. And then reviewing end-to-end test for storage. Karen, do you have an update on this? Or Scott Carilli or Aaron Boyd or somebody who's been working on this project. Anybody have an update on it? Okay, go ahead, Brad.
So I don't know if what Karan has here listed is the same thing as like the general E2E effort. I've been talking with Clint about the strategy we discussed with getting the tests run on VMware, and I'm pursuing that still, and that's in progress.
Got it.
So maybe we want to change that to reflect. I'm not.
Let's leave this as is and let Kieran update it when we're able to get in touch with him, and then we can add a new item for the VMware stuff.
Okay.
All right, I think that's pretty much it. I think we've managed to get a lot done again this quarter, so thank you all for all your hard work. Let's go back to the agenda. It looks like there is a PR that Jing and Xing added. Do you guys want to talk about this?
Yeah, so this is basically to move the APIs move the snapshot APIs in tree. We have mainly two questions about this one. So when we do the CSI design, we added parameters for a create snapshot request. So in order to pass in the parameters, we need the storage class. So now the question is whether we should add the storage class in the volume snapshot spec. So if you can search for storage class name, right. So yeah, so the volume snapshot spec, right? So we can add the storage class name here as well. So the question is whether one way is to pass this through the storage class from the PVC. That's one way, right? So when you take a snapshot, you know which PVC is, so you can get the storage class there, then you can use the parameter in that. But then I think the concern is whether you want to pass in the same parameters in the snapshot as the ones in the volumes, right? So do you want to use different parameters? So that's why this is one suggestion is to just.
I was talking to Jing about this yesterday, I think, or a couple days ago, I forget. So I think is taking a step back, where this requirement came from was the fact that when you provision a snapshot, similar to when you provision a new volume, there are going to be a bunch of knobs that are specific to a particular storage backend that you may want to manipulate.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do not want to do is put those knobs into the object that is exposed to application developers, the folks who are actually deploying workloads on Kubernetes. So the mechanism by which you request a snapshot, the volume snapshot object, should not have anything that's not portable. You should be able to move that object across clusters and have it still work. So that means that we can't put it on the volume snapshot object, but where do we put it? So this was the same exact problem that we had with the PVC object. You know, storage systems have specific parameters that need to be modified. But if we put it on the PVC object is no longer portable. Where do we put it? We invented the storage class object to be a home for these opaque parameters that are specific to a volume plugin, and storage class objects are created and modified by the cluster administrator, so we're okay with those objects being unique per cluster. So now the question here is, well, how do we handle it in the snapshot scenario? Do we introduce a new storage class-like object, or do we reuse the existing object? Jing was suggesting, you know, for the most part, the new object would look pretty much like the storage class object, so why not just reuse the existing storage class object? She mentioned that, you know, the name is generic enough, storage class. It can be used for snapshots, and the provisioner that's specified inside it could just refer to a snapshot provisioner. I'm okay with that proposal. I don't know if we need to encode it into the API as a first-class field yet. What I would suggest is making it an annotation initially.
Well, hold on. Even if you agree to that you'll just reuse storage class, can you specify a different storage class when you take the snapshot than the storage class of the volume from which the snapshot is taken?
Yes, that's what I would like to do. I would like to decouple the original storage class from the storage class of the snapshot. The way that I see it is the original storage class was parameters that were required to provision that volume. And the new snapshot is parameters required to provision the snapshot. They may be completely separate. The set of parameters that apply to the creation of a volume may not be the same as the set of parameters that apply to the creation of a snapshot. And therefore, I'd like these to be coupled in separate storage classes.
But I think it's still possible for the driver to share the same storage class, basically because the parameters are opaque to CO, right? So the driver can decide.
But like, we should not make that a requirement.
Right.
And I personally think that's a bad idea, mixing storage classes for snapshots and for volumes, but we can leave that option open and let vendors decide.
The risk I see is the possibility for conflicts, right? If you have two different storage classes that basically end up on different storage systems, and then you have corresponding snapshot storage classes for those storage systems, and you attempt to mix and match them in a way that's not going to work, the end user is going to end up with a snapshot that never gets taken, and they'll be upset about that.
I mean, that's the same as if I were to move my PVC object reference to a storage class that doesn't exist, because it existed on a previous cluster, but it doesn't exist on my new cluster.
So one proposal we are thinking is if user does not specify storage class in the snapshot API, then we can go ahead to use the PVC storage class.
That is really weird.
Or there is a default.
Well, so this is optional, right? So that's the thing, that this is optional in volume snapshot spec. It's also optional in PVC.
Right. So
back.
if a snapshot class is not specified, what should the behavior be? My gut feeling is that you should not specify anything. It should be if somebody specifies it, you pass it in. If they don't specify it, don't go and try to be smart and pull it off the PVC or something like that.
But if you specify the PVC, the storage class in the PVC, but not in the volume snapshot, and if you're not using the same one, then there may be a problem finding the correct driver.
Yeah, we need to find the provisional the driver from storage class. There must be some.
So then maybe we can follow the same model that we have for PVCs, which is if a snapshot storage class name is not specified, we look for the default storage class for snapshots and use that.
But because when you take snapshot, you take snapshot from a volume for a volume, so it's highly related to that volume. And
right. The provisioner is related to that volume, but the parameters may not be.
But the provisioner's in the storage class, so you could unintentionally pick a storage class with a different provisioner than the provisioner of the volume, and there's no way for the end user to know that they've done that.
How about if we allow for the same storage class to be used but have a different field for snapshot parameters? So you have the existing set of parameters which are to be used for provisioning volumes, and we introduce a new field that would be for snapshots. So that way you could still reuse the same storage class, but it's very explicit which set of parameters are for provisioning and which set of parameters are for snapshotting.
Yeah, I mean, I like that better. If you were to reuse the snapshot or the storage class, it should be obvious which parameters do which things.
Mm-hmm. And then we can say if we do that, then I would be okay with basically if the snapshot or if the storage class is not specified on the snapshot object, reuse the storage class from the PVC, the source PVC, and then it's very explicit what the snapshot parameters should be.
But you still want to allow the user to pick a different one if they want.
Yes.
And if that results in a unresolvable conflict, then
so
too bad.
Right.
Is there a case for a volume that is snapshot? Let's say an EBS volume, you take a snapshot and then restore the snapshot to a different, different speed EBS volume with different IOPS or something. And is there any? Yeah,
exactly. And that's yes. So after the snapshot is created, so this process here, these objects that are shown here are for creating the snapshot. Once the snapshot is created, basically generating a new volume and pre-populating it with the contents of this snapshot is done through a PVC object. And in the PVC object, you can always specify your storage class, and it can be different from the storage class of the original PVC. So you could.
That's what I'm wondering. Is that a valid use case? I mean, is it ever?
I mean, yeah, it is. Like I can imagine, I've got some data running on a PD SSD or running on a standard PD, and then, I can rehydrate it onto an SSD if I want to.
Yeah, there is quite some use cases like they want to change the parameters of type of the volume and also change the location, maybe zone, different region.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's obviously the failure domain for this is pretty large, right? You could pick any storage class that it can't be restored to, and then we just can't do anything.
Yeah.
The mismatch. So I just think we need to be very verbose about the error reporting and messaging.
I like the idea of giving users a lot of flexibility to specify exactly what they want, but yeah, like Brad said, things will go wrong and they won't know why necessarily.
Yeah. So I think we need to optimize for the default case. And I like this idea of, okay, if you don't specify a storage class, which would be the default case, we pull the storage class off the PVC object, and then there's a second field on the storage class for explicitly for snapshot parameters. My concern with sharing this snapshot object is if you confuse the parameters between provisioning and snapshotting, it gets very, very confusing. So if we can be explicit about that, I'm okay with that design.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll keep this one and we'll add another parameters.
We can introduce these snapshot parameters as an alpha field.
Okay.
That way we have the ability to back out in the future if we need to.
Okay. Okay, and the second question is about the condition. So if you move down a little bit, that's the snapshot status. So when we have the design discussions on the CSI, we have 3 status basically. On the CSI side, basically uploading, ready, and error uploading. But that is the volume plugin because that's that's a synchronous call. And this is the API layer. API actually is asynchronous. So we're thinking that we should add a creating condition. So basically, in addition to uploading, ready, and error, we should have another. Basically, this is before the snapshot is cut. So basically, we started the creating process, but it's not done yet. So that would be creating.
Yeah, that seems perfectly fine to me.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that's that's basically it. Yeah.
All right. Cool. I'm excited about this. Anything else you guys want to talk about?
Hey, I did want to just go baing to the snapshot parameters real quick, just to chime in.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that's a good idea because I was talking with Jing on Slack and on GitHub the past day or two where like with the standard big 3 cloud providers, when you go to take a snapshot of a volume, it just gets snapshotted wherever based on the implementation of the cloud provider. But with things like Portworx or .mesh or Ceph or anything that's storage that's running in cluster, it tends to be snapshotted locally. And you may want to specify that when you take a snapshot of whatever type of storage you have, that you want that snapshot to be transmitted externally.
Yep.
To S3 or wherever. And so I think if there's a snapshot storage class or snapshot parameters, that would be a good use case for that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think what I'm starting to realize is that this pattern of a class to represent the specific parameters for provisioning is probably a pretty generic pattern that can apply to a lot of other things worth thinking about.
So the one thing about this is giving me heartburn. I like the idea of like being able to restore a snapshot to a different kind of storage from an end user's perspective. But from an implementation perspective, like NetApp will implement a NetApp snapshot, obviously, and you'll be able to create a new NetApp volume from the NetApp snapshot because the NetApp provisioner will know how to do that. But if the user wants to create a non-NetApp volume from a NetApp snapshot, there's no way for that to happen unless they either put NetApp specific logic in their other provisioners, which would never happen, or we agree on some sort of a mechanism for exporting that snapshot into a format that can be consumed by other provisioners.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the storage system needs to be on board with making their snapshot format portable. If they are not, then we can't do that on their behalf.
Well, no, I mean, what do you mean by portable? There's a file system that's inside of a box, but if you restore it to a different machine with a different file system, you're going to lose at least a little bit of metadata. Just like converting from an ext to a XFS file system, it's not going to be exactly the same. When you restore that thing, something is going to be slightly different.
So my understanding is like to like works by default with pretty much anybody who supports snapshots. Being able to rehydrate your snapshot into a different storage system is behavior that may or may not be supported. And it sounds like what you're asking for is the ability to do that.
Well, no, I mean, we're designing a feature that will let the user ask for that, but I don't know how we will build it.
And we don't have to, right? We can basically reject such requests. We can say this is not a snapshot that we support.
As long as there's a way for the system to not allow the user to shoot themselves in the foot and not know about it,
Yeah.
So if you take a NetOps snapshot and then you say, I'd like to rehydrate this as a Ceph volume, that needs to be an immediate, like, no, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how we would do that because the fact that there's two different provisioners is hidden from the end user.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm just saying it needs to happen.
Okay.
So I know the failover is going to happen eventually, because eventually you're going to hit the provisioner. It's going to say, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to be able to do that. The question is if there's any fast validation that we can do at the API server level to immediately reject the request.
But maybe if the provisioners of the two different storage classes don't match, that would be. But that, I feel like that's unnecessarily restrictive because one could imagine a really smart provisioner that was compatible with other provisioners.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say let's leave it more flexible. And actually, in general, we want to start off more restrictive and then loosen rather than the other way around because it becomes more difficult. So maybe we start off with an API validation that says the provisioners must match. And then in the future, if somebody comes to us with a concrete use case and says, actually, I am able to provision or use a snapshot from somebody else's system, then we remove that restriction because it's always easier to remove a restriction than to go in and apply it.
Okay, I like that idea.
Shane,
makes me feel better.
Yeah, so this would be at restore time, right? Yeah, we can.
Right,
Yeah,
just
we could,
API validation that compares
Sure.
the provisioners.
Well, and the same thing when you're taking a snapshot. If you specify a storage class that's a different provisioner than the storage class of the volume, that also seems like it's never going to work.
Yeah, that definitely. Yeah, that should fail. Yeah.
Are we at all worried about a proliferation of storage classes? Somebody setting up a whole bunch to address different ways of taking snapshots, as well as a whole nother set for the current use case.
I think that was something that was raised when we first started talking about snapshot or storage classes for volume provisioning. The idea was, well, what if I have 50 different performance grades that I want to expose? I'm going to end up with 50 different storage classes. Theoretically, that is possible. But in reality, I think what we've noticed is, at least on the volume provisioning side, it ends up being just a handful of options because essentially what a storage class is a cluster administrator saying, hey, although there may be millions of possibilities on the backend system, here are the handful that I am going to expose to my end users. So I imagine for storage classes, something similar for snapshots, a similar pattern will emerge.
Okay.
But it is a possibility.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, we can certainly use the same struct for both, but should there be one for volume provisioning and one for snapshot provisioning, or should they be just one that has fields for both? I guess that.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth about that. I agree with the argument that the storage class object is almost generic enough to be reused. So I'd like to prevent the proliferation of objects if at all possible, and start with creating a new alpha field on the storage class object, seeing if that works, and if it's absolutely infeasible for whatever reason, we can consider introducing a separate new object for it.
Okay, makes sense.
All right, any other comments, concerns about snapshots or anything else?
A week ago at the CSI meeting, I brought up an issue about lists, this list snapshots CSI API, and I think you mentioned that currently Kubernetes has no plans to consume that particular API. Is that still the case?
We don't consume the list volumes API, for example. So I think initially for the V1 implementation of snapshots, I don't think there is a plan to use, at least other than like listing fetching a particular snapshot.
Right. Okay.
Unbounded.
So unless if uploading is supported, I mean, you may want to use that one. You may want to
Right,
use
for
the
fetching a
snapshots.
single
Right, yeah.
snapshot, but I think what Ben is talking about is unbounded, listing all snapshots. I don't
Right.
think we have any problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that someday, but
Yeah.
as long as we don't plan on supporting it now, that's fine.
Yeah. All right, cool. Anything else? All right, any other comments, questions, concerns? If not, we'll call it for the day. All right, thank you very much for attending, and we'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thanks.